I'm C.L. Strauss. I'm the current vice chair for the association. And I'm going to go right into introducing our first speaker, who is Dave Miller, who is with FEMA. FEMA's Associate Administrator for the Flood Insurance and Mitigation Administration. And it's a position he has held since September 2011. Dave has served as the administrator of the Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management Division from 2004 to 2011, and during his tenure, he served as the governor's authorized representative for 11 president-declared major disasters, including the 2008 flooding disaster that historically was the largest disaster to occur in the state of Iowa. And prior to that, he had served in many other areas in Iowa. So I'd like to welcome Dave Miller.
First, let me thank ASFPM for hosting this event and providing us with an opportunity to talk about our programs and what's been going on in FEMA and FEMA for the last number of months. And thank you guys for being here to having this discussion. And I'd like it to be more of a discussion. Frankly, I work better if I get a little interaction and feedback than if I'm just delivering something. So the staff yesterday, I always tell the story, and the staff always goes, oh God, what's he going to say now? They give me, how many pages did you give me, Mark? 11. 11 pages of talking points. I just like to tell stories. And Chad and the guys know that, but we did put some organization around it. The stories we're going to talk today really follow kind of the FEMA organization, that we're really going to talk about risk reduction, we're going to talk about risk insurance, we're going to talk about all those things that drive our agency. So if I'm looking at the area of risk reduction and I really want to talk about one of those things, one of the stories they gave me the hint here says, how do we understand mitigation and resilience as an ongoing conversation? And I'm happy to see that the PDM funding was increased to $63 million. Everybody happy about $63 million in PDM? Before we get overjoyed, here's the dilemma. Chad and I have talked about it. You guys have fought for it. We've gone through a number of things on PDM. We want, in the program and what we do, we want a mitigation all the time program. Chad and I and senior leaders at ASFPM yesterday and others have had this discussion for a long time, is how do we promote mitigation to buy down risk in the United States as an all-the-time program. Frankly, the money that we put in, notwithstanding what's in PDM, the money that we put in mostly comes out of HMGP. On the other side, it comes out of the flood insurance program. But we want it to happen all the time. We've had some discussions on how we get there all the time. We've had discussions on the efficiencies of the system. Over the last year, we made grant application processes easier. We combined some things together, either by law or by design. We've done some things to make the grant programs easier to get through. But the truth is, folks, notwithstanding the money and when it becomes available, we're not executing very well on mitigation projects. We have a lot of money hanging in the balance, whether it's an HMGP or how we move forward in leftover PDM money, how we roll it. We're rolling money forward and doing it. But the message that I think Congress often sees as we look for funding in these areas as you fight it is that we don't execute. When I talked to the team this year, one of the things with PDM was we have money that we've rolled over. One of the hints that we got is if I roll more money over in a year than we asked for an appropriation, it's a pretty good indicator that we've got a problem. And rather than point fingers at each other, it's how do we get together to solve problems and execute mitigation dollars. It really is that simple and that difficult. Because if it's how we design projects, it's the strings, it's the lack of resources in a community to execute programs, it's the lack of planning that sets priorities. The truth is we're not executing. And if I move over to the hazard mitigation grant program side, what I find is I've got billions of dollars sitting there from disasters that we haven't executed yet, which is also an indicator of a problem. So when we go to the Hill, I talk about mitigation all the time, and we get into discussions like, well, Mr. Miller and Roy is here this morning. I saw him earlier. He's out there somewhere. Roy gets into a discussion in front of Congress that says, well, it's nice that you talk about mitigation all the time, but the federal budget doesn't reflect that, Dave. The truth is you're not putting your money or doing the asking where your mouth is. My point is if we're going to do the ask, we've got to be able to execute. And we've got plenty of mitigation to do. We've got mitigation because of the disasters we've had. We've got mitigation because of the disasters we will have. We've got mitigation because of future conditions such as that we may get articulated through climate adaptation. We got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of projects we can do. The other part of it, though, because of the way we look at projects that I don't want to miss, and this is the other discussion that's going on in this area, is that we're not moving the needle a lot. We use a figure, I think, and somebody's got to correct me if I'm wrong, so Mark, if you're here, give them the right figure. But I think the figure we often use is we do disaster risk reduction at about, what, $3.5 billion a year? Somebody raise their hand and tell me that's true. The truth is, though, if I compare that to the cost of disasters, not just the federal cost of disasters, but the cost of disasters overall, we're not really moving the needle a lot. And if I'm not moving the needle a lot, if it's about disaster risk reduction, how do I leverage the money I have in my programs with other programs to make them more efficient and actually move the needle more? It's not just about property acquisitions. It's not just about elevations. It's not just about some of the things I do. So part of the discussion that we're having is how do I leverage the dollars I have to get a bigger bang for the buck? We get into things in the federal government like duplication of benefit and duplication of program. Both are illegal. Set in budget laws, statutorily and other laws. But the truth is I can do things in marrying programs together where I can leverage dollars and make it happen. It's not always easy, but I think it's the way to move forward. So that got us in a little bit into the funding of the programs. I think the other thing that you'll see that we've been asked to testify about in the funding for the programs, there's a strategic initiative that sits above the budget marks. And you heard the talk about it, and you'd see it in the president's budget, about $400 million for mitigation, for pre-disaster mitigation. So if you're looking at the budget, there's a couple things that don't make sense. On the PDM side, the pre-disaster mitigation, we zero the budget, and then the president puts in $400 million for pre-disaster mitigation out of the OGSI. I love acronyms, Chad. I don't even know what all OGSI stands for anymore, but it is a strategic initiative. But I think the point there is there still is a recognition that pre-disaster mitigation needs to happen. It got tied a little bit to climate and climate adaptation, and the point is guys, we've got, whatever you feel about climate and climate change, we've got a changing environment where we're having more and more disasters and they're costing us more and more money. If you listened to General Honore yesterday, part of the reason it costs us money isn't just the change in climate, part of it is where we live and how we live and the value of the properties we live and what we have to mitigate. It's how we're concentrating people, who we're putting in risk areas. Do we need to move them out? How do we work through that? Part of that initiative, even though PDM is the source, which is the program that this money would move through, it is to put an emphasis in those areas. I hope that we see OGSA money. Number one, it means the budget is acting and there's money actually above the mark to spend on strategic initiatives. And I'm happy that one of those initiatives is a recognition that we need to do more to mitigate losses and mitigate risk in the United States. And we'll take advantage of that where we can. I think the challenge in FEMA is to position ourselves to know that we're ready to execute those dollars when it comes. That depends a lot on you and your communities. Do I have a robust plan? Do I know what my priorities are? Do I know I'm going to execute the next time I can take advantage of a tragic circumstance that gives me money to execute in my community? Can I move forward and mitigate against future loss? So what other story did Mark want me to tell? We've talked about community resilience. As we had the discussion on insurance, there were a couple things that happened in insurance this last year that I'm sure most of you were following. There are a couple bills that came out. We talked last year about Biggert Waters and BW12, and we'll talk about it some more. I don't want to talk about, we tended to have the discussion in terms of what section of the law and this compared to this, and I don't want to do that. The reason I don't want to do it is, frankly, it's not one that citizens understand. They don't care if they're affected by Section 205 or 207 or this section or this section. What they know is their premiums were going to go up. And they were going to go up substantially for any variety of reasons under the law. One of the things I had the great fortune of doing last summer was going out to communities in many of your states. I was in Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and other places, and actually had discussion with citizens about what they were facing. And you get, as you make these transitions, you get everybody caught in the in-between. We had new housing sales that we stalled. And what was worse is because of the way the law works, you walk in today, I buy a new house, I think my insurance premium is going to be X, I can afford it, I sign, and then the next week I get a bill from my insurance company and my cost has gone up 200 and some percent. I can't afford it. Now I can't afford my home. Now you're going to foreclose. Now it's going to do this. We stopped real estate sales and starts. We stopped these things in our communities. We heard from families. I remember talking to a mother in Louisiana, simply said, I can't afford this. I moved here for this job to do these things, to live in this area. I bought a house. I was given this. Now I feel like I've been lied to because now I can't afford to live here. I can't afford to leave. I can't afford to stay. I don't know what's coming next. And the fear that was there of what was going to happen to them because insurance was foisted upon them. It was required of them. It wasn't there to help them. It became this onerous burden that they had. It's an interesting discussion, and it talked about the pain and the price points and all the parts that went into insurance. It was the critical discussion at the time. Without doing this attribution to a particular politician, what I found most interesting and most prophetic, I was talking about it this morning before we walked in here, I thought it put it most precisely when one of the politicians simply said, we need the flood insurance program and we need it to be affordable. The recognition that the flood insurance program was needed instead of forced upon people, I thought was a startling revelation. Because in most cases, the only reason I buy this is because you require me to buy it. And then you require me to buy something I can't afford, which means you take me out of my house. You move me. It happened to me, not because of me. It wasn't here to help me. It's here to penalize me. And you lie to me in the processes because you don't tell me these things up front. Or you fail to tell me that my risk would change. And as my risk would change, my prices go up. We get involved in all those assessments. But they were good conversations, and at the end of the day, one of the things that I left with was people need the insurance program, or there are places in the United States that we simply can't live, and we'll have this conversation here in a minute. But there are places where we can't live, and you need us to live there. You need the products we produce, you need the contribution to the gross domestic product, you need us to be here. It's in your interest as the nation for us to be here, which means somebody's got to share the risk. Which means the only way I can be here is if somebody helps underwrite that and it's insurable. But you can't price me out of it. I need to be able to have insurance, and I need to have it be affordable. So a lot of the discussion that came afterwards in the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act, what passed this year, was to roll back some of the most egregious parts of that, reinstitute some price increases, on average 15% a class, no more than 18% for an individual. We're walking through those pieces. Not everybody gets relief under the Affordability Act. I heard this morning there's already a discussion that it didn't provide relief to businesses. So small businesses go under the old Biggert waters, they still see the 25% increases, they still see this, while other people get kicked back to 15, no more than 18. There's work to do in those areas. I don't think any of us know what the real price points and pain points are in insurance. It gives us a hint. There's another little caveat in the Affordability Act that says the insurance, your premium shouldn't be any more than 1% of the value of. I don't know if we can get there. The hard part of that is they also wanted the program to be actuarially sound and financially sound. If I keep providing subsidized rates and I don't get to charge a full risk rate, I don't get to generate the income into the program, I don't pick up the volume of insurance policies, if I don't do these things, we'll never have a financially viable program. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. Is as we're having this discussion, the discussion we're having with all of you, the discussion really should be about what does the next iteration of insurance begin to look like? How are we going to walk through this? The next reauthorization comes up in 2017. We know that what we were doing in Biggert Waters and now under the Affordability Act is simply setting the stage for what comes next. But it's up to all of us to figure out what comes next. A lot of people had their hand in. ASFPM played a role, a number of entities played a role in passing Biggert Waters and the Affordability Act. But we can't stop. The question is what comes next? And how do we use this as a tool to mitigate against future losses? So one of the other stories I get to tell is we do strategic planning. Believe it or not, we actually strategic planned in FEMA. That's supposed to get a laugh. Because I think it's funny, but we do strategic planning. And one of the things we talked about with the increasing cost of disasters and how we walk through this is what do we do to control those things? How do we lessen the cost? One of the questions I asked early on is lessen whose cost? Are we simply trying to decrease the federal investment in disasters, or are we trying to reduce the cost of disasters? Because I can shift risk. I can get somebody else to write what the federal government writes. If it's about shifting the responsibility, that's a tactic, a strategy that we could employ. At the same time, if I'm really about reducing the risk, really reducing the cost of disasters overall, then in my world, there is only one answer. You're gonna have to figure out how to mitigate. You're gonna have to figure out how to manage and reduce the risk. It's not about risk transfer, it's actually getting rid of some of the risk. How do I do that? Or what's at risk, or the impact of the risk? How do I do that? Well, one of the things in this whole hierarchy that you'll begin to hear about, and Craig, in all frankness, always hates branding and these little cliche things, but this is one that we've been charged with going through. It's a little thing called one and done. And one of the discussions, because one of the criticisms of the NFIP has always been our subsidized rates promote growth in high-risk areas, that we actually increase the risk. Because if there wasn't a program, you wouldn't be able to build here, because insurance wouldn't underwrite it here. Go back to, we need the insurance and we need to be affordable. Well, the truth is, maybe the thing and the answer is, we need insurance, we need it to be affordable, but if I'm going to mitigate, if I'm going to truly do this and have it, I want to make sure that when you build and build in this environment, you're building to a level that actually doesn't expose the American public inordinately to the loss. And that we understand where the risk is assigned and how we're going to pay for it. And if you're going to build, you're going to build to a level where insurance would underwrite it, and you're going to build to a level where I don't have to come back. One and done. I'll help you get there in the name of the disaster. You'll hear us talk about tying 404 and 406 mitigation together. Everybody know what 404 and 406 are? Nope. One of them is the Public Assistance Program. The other one is the HMGP program. And as the boss often says, it's all mitigation, so tell me why they're different. Well, there's a thing under the Public Assistance Program as I look at opportunities to mitigate that says if you're going to go to a new standard, if you're going to go to a new code, the new building code, it had to be enforced prior to the event, because I'm not going to pay for you to go to new building codes and standards when the only person investing in it is the federal government. It was a slippery slope kind of thing. So I'm not going to allow you to go to a new code and standard unless it was adopted prior to the event. Or if you're going to do an enhanced project and actually move in this direction, or you're going to do an alternate project, I'm going to penalize you for it. I'm going to reduce the cost share. It has a certain logic to it. Been a long-standing tenet of what we do. But we came back in and looking at cost reduction, and we said, how about when it's in the government's interest to reduce cost? And how about we change the paradigm a little bit, that I'm not going to allow you to move towards a new standard. I'm going to require you to go there. So fast forward a little bit to Oklahoma City and the Moore, Oklahoma tornadoes. If I'm out of time, just tell me, because I can talk forever, and often do. So move forward to Moore, Oklahoma, and what happened in Moore is we were involved in influencing building codes. And one of the big things, the points of discussions there, is why weren't safe rooms required in schools? And if you're going to rebuild this school, shouldn't you require a safe room? And where's the money come for safe rooms? Well, the truth is Oklahoma has a good program for safe room construction. The truth is they've been doing it for a while, and the truth is it's been eligible under HMGP for a long time. It was eligible. So then it becomes a question of priority of funding and all those other things. But because it was about ready to be adopted into the international code in 2015, we brought it up in a meeting one day, and the decision was, you know what? We're not going to simply say it's eligible. We're going to require it. We're going to require it. And we did. The state accepted it. They wanted it. It helped with priority and priority setting. We liked it. It reduced the future cost. It helped fix a problem in putting safe rooms, in mitigating in critical facilities where children and others were involved. It was the right thing to do. But the key here is, and I hope everybody pays attention, is we went from making it simply eligible to requiring it. So now the discussion in this whole thing of one and done is, what other things should we require? You're hearing us in the Mitigation Framework Leadership Group begin to talk about the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard. That's for federal agency and us to talk about how we invest, what standards we build to, and you'll hear us talk about best available data or the existing map data plus so many feet of freeboard, that it becomes a standard for all of us. I don't allow you to build freeboard, I require you to go to it. And what should the standard be? How far ahead do I get to look in that standard? Many states right now, and Mark and others have the numbers, but so many states already have a freeboard requirement. It is base flood elevation plus 2 feet. Others are a little less than that. But if I'm thinking about climate and climate adaptation and how much I get to project in the future, it's about mitigating against future events, what should that standard be? And should it be on a 50-year curve or a 100-year curve? Should it be 4 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet? Between what's base flood elevation today and what's projected into the future? That's just one area, small area, but expensive area, to say, how do I project forward and what should the new standard be and what's my requirement, both for federal builds and people that build with federal money. On the building code side, as we walk through this, the policy consideration is when I go in and I give you money to repair public facilities with federal dollars, do I require you, even though you may not have adopted it in your community or in your state, I require you to go to the new code. You're going to build with our dollars, you're going to build to this level, to this standard, to this requirement, because I don't want to come back for this disaster. I want to be one and done. Well, I can get there that says, I can make you do that standard where there's a federal investment. The next one is kind of like floodplain management. I'm not only going to require you to do it when you rebuild with federal dollars, I'm going to require you to adopt the building codes, and all new permitting will be in accordance with the code. That's a huge policy consideration. But to the discussion of how do I raise the standard, what's the investment, what's the return on the investment, how do I mitigate future losses, and how do I get, because it's in our interest, to go to new codes and standards. We talk a lot about buildings. Are there other codes and standards that we ought to go to? What about infrastructure and infrastructure standards? What about those kinds of rebuilds? What about highway and transportation infrastructures? What about all of those things? And we keep talking about it in terms of flooding. What about the other disasters? Chad and I and others were in the national level exercise a couple months ago. First thing in the MIT flag is we're having a meeting one day is, Well, gee, Dave, we've been talking about this federal flood risk management standard. I wonder if there needs to be an earthquake standard. So do I. And does there need to be a wind standard? And do there need to be other standards as we walk through this? If we're about reducing the cost, then what's the investment we're willing to make, and how do we do it? One last story. I promise. It'll only take a minute. To show you how it's being articulated, and I think this is part of the discussion, and what the cost is. As we're walking through Sandy recovery, we're walking with public entities under the PA program. We're looking at opportunities to mitigate against future losses. The normal project worksheet, how the PA program works, for Long Island Power was about $835 million. And again, don't quote me on the number because I'd have to look at the worksheet. But in order to effectively do mitigation, which we wanted to encourage, to get them to go to a standard so we don't have to come back, the one and done, that cost increased from $835 million to about $1.3 billion. And yet the return on the investment we think is evident, and we're moving in that direction. That's tying 404 and 406 together. So one of the other areas we looked at doing this is kind of a required mitigation. So not only am I going to require you to go to the standards, but I'm going to require you to spend your mitigation money in this way to do these things because it's in my interest, in the national interest as you move forward. Folks, there are huge policy considerations in that. Do I take the decision making away from locals because there's a national interest to lessening disasters, the cost of disasters? Do I work in cooperation and coordination towards a goal and how we invest money? How do I tie 404 and 406 together? These are the exciting discussions that we're facing every day. My last pitch is I can't do it without you. The engagement in community and risk decisions, how we look at risk, how we use maps, how we use the tools, you're the point of the spear. You're the one that's having the discussions. It's our job to get you equipped with the information, the data, the analytics that you need to go out and do it, and to invite this conversation, to invite the controversy, to invite the competing interests that will be part of this policy setting. So thank you all for everything that you do.